They auctioned her off like a stray horse with too much fire in her eyes. No name, no kin to speak for her. Just a scrap of paper nailed to a post, Mira 50. Strong-willed, doesn't listen, untamable, the kind of label that made most men step back. But one man, tired, grieving, stubborn in his own quiet, stepped forward. Rhett Lanigan didn't buy her for labor or pity. He bought her because something in her eyes looked like something in his A fight still burning even after the world tried to put it out. But what happens when the wild one doesn't want to be owned, only seen? What no one told Rhett, what no one imagined, was that Mira wasn't too wild for a man. She was just waiting for a man wild enough to ride beside her, not ahead. And what happened next wasn't a storm or a taming. It was quieter. A kettle warming at dawn, a saddle tightened without words, a fence mended side by side. This isn't a story about rescuing a woman. It's about recognizing her worth before she proved a thing. And if you've ever been told you were too loud, too stubborn, too late, or too much, this story might feel like coming home. So stay, because something rare is riding in with the dust. What did he see in her that no one else did? And when her past came knocking, did he stay? Let's find out. They said she was too wild, not in the way of broken things or bad tempers, but in the way the wind moves through cottonwoods, restless, unpinned, and unwilling to ask permission. Mira Halden wasn't the sort of woman men in Silt Ridge sent flowers to. She rode astride instead of side saddle. She whistled louder than the farmhands. She danced barefoot in the creek. And worst of all, she laughed like no one had ever told her to be quiet. By 49, she'd been run out of 2 towns, blamed for 1 broken engagement, and pitied by every preacher's wife who whispered she was unsuitable for any God-fearing man. Truth was, she'd once been loved, but by a man who wanted to tame her. And when she refused the bit, he left her to ruin. She lived the last 5 years sleeping in barns, cleaning stables, and mending other people's coats. No home, no kin, just a threadbare pack and a heart she refused to close. And now here she was, up on the auction block, not for crimes or debt, but because she had no place left to stand. A group of men murmured, laughed, and mocked. She's too wild, one said. Good for horses, maybe. Not for a man's house. She stood silent, chin-high, arms at her sides, dust curling at her boots, the weight of being unwanted pressing in like a slow drought. And then a voice, low, rough, honest. I'll take her. Heads turned. A man with calloused hands, a stitched-up coat, and tired eyes stepped forward. Rhett Lanigan, a widowed rancher barely holding his land together. A man who hadn't bought anything in years, let alone another person's past. But something about her had steadied his breath. Something about the way she didn't flinch. And so with $3 and a nod, Rhett took home the woman they called Too Wild, not knowing she'd become the first thing on that ranch to truly belong. But what happens when a woman used to fleeing is asked to stay? Mira Halden hadn't ridden in a wagon since she was a girl. Back then, she'd sat beside her father's legs, swinging arms, sunburnt, singing off-key to the rhythm of hooves. This time, she sat on a plank bench behind a stranger, Rhett Lanigan, the man who just bought her for $3 and a thread of dignity. The road out to his ranch was long, silent, and dry. Dust clung to everything, even the parts of her she thought had hardened beyond reach. She kept her pack on her lap as if it might anchor her, if this turned out like every other time. Rhett didn't say much, just clicked to the mule and kept his gaze forward. But he didn't stare at her like the others had. Didn't poke, didn't smirk, didn't ask if she could cook or sew or keep quiet. Instead, as they passed a dried-up stream bed, he finally spoke. "You ever ride?" She blinked. "Horse or wagon horse?" She nodded. "Better than I walk." A pause. Then the faintest smile from beneath his week-old beard. At the ranch, it was nothing grand. A house with a porch held up by 2 stubborn posts. A barn leaned like an old man mid-prayer. But the fence was mended, the gate swung true, and the chickens looked well-fed. "Wasn't looking to buy anyone," Rhett said, helping her down without touching her. "But you look like you needed a place to land." Mira almost laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think I'm some hawk come home?" He met her eyes. "No, ma'am. I think you're tired of flying." That night he showed her the small spare room off the kitchen. 1 bed, a chipped dresser, a window that creaked in the wind. "There's a lock on the inside," he said. "You don't owe me anything." You stay as long as you like. Leave when you're ready. She studied him, unsure what game this was, but he looked like a man who'd buried too many things to lie now. So she said nothing. Just closed the door, slid the bolt, and leaned her back to the wood. The silence was different here. Not the kind that punished, the kind that waited. But how long can a woman like Mira believe a man like Rhett isn't just being kind before it feels like hope? First time in years, no one yelled at her to get up. No one banged on the door. No threat, no order, just birdsong and the smell of coffee drifting in like a gentle knock. She found Rhett Lanigan outside already working, shirt rolled to the elbows, tending to a bent hinge on the barn gate. A dog lay nearby, old and deaf, lifting its head when Mira stepped onto the porch. "You hungry?" he asked without looking. "I can fix something." He shook his head. "Not what I asked." She hesitated, then said, "Yes." Inside, he'd left 2 eggs and a heel of bread beside the stove. Nothing fancy, but he'd made a place for her at the table. It was the strangest thing to be expected without being asked for anything. And that's what tangled her up most. She wasn't used to the quiet being kind. Wasn't used to a man letting her breathe without trying to own the air she took in. So she found ways to push. She scrubbed the porch until her hands ached. She offered to break the colt no one had touched in months. She fixed the saddle blanket that was torn and repaired the fence without being asked. And when Rhett came in one evening and found her stitching in the dark, he finally said, "You're working like you owe someone a debt." She didn't look up. "Don't I?" "No," he said simply. "Not here." Mira almost snapped back, almost said something sharp and defensive. But something in his voice stopped her. Not pity, not praise, just presence. Later that night, she stood at the barn door looking up at the stars. The same sky she'd stared at from wagon cellars and back porches across 4 counties. But here it didn't feel like it was staring back with judgment. The dog Oliver shuffled up beside her. She scratched behind his ear, and he leaned into her like he'd always known her. It was too much, too easy. She whispered into the dark. "They said I couldn't be tamed. Said I'd break a man before I ever warmed his house. And yet here she was. Not broken, not tamed, but seen, bit by bit." Rhett never asked where she came from. Never asked what earned her the label too wild. But one night after supper, when the oil lamp flickered low and Mira reached to clean the dishes again, he gently touched her wrist and said, "You don't have to prove you're worth keeping." She froze. The words sank deeper than she wanted to admit. Because what if he meant them? But can a woman who's only ever been chased, bargained, or feared ever trust she's finally being chosen? The summer rain came soft and sudden, like an apology from the sky. Mira Halden stood at the threshold of the barn, hands resting against the frame, watching the earth soak and swell. It reminded her of how healing never made noise. It just happened slowly until you looked down and realized something new had grown. She didn't know when it had happened exactly, but she'd stopped counting the days since she arrived. Stopped bracing for the slam of a door, the bark of a name used like a leash. Rhett Lanigan worked beside her now, not in front of her or behind. They repaired a fence one morning, shoulder to shoulder, and he handed her the pliers with a wordless nod that said more than any compliment. "You ever miss it?" she asked him once, as they sat on the edge of the corral watching the wildest mare circle restlessly. "Your old life, before your wife passed." He was quiet for a long time, then said, "I miss what I thought it was going to be." She nodded. She knew that ache, the one where the dream never arrived, but the dead of it stayed anyway. That night, Mira left the kitchen window open. Rain tapped gently on the sill, and she reached for her sketchbook. Pages she'd long ago torn from her life were slowly returning. She'd started drawing again, horses mostly. Some imagined. One looked a lot like Rhett, though she didn't say. Later, she found him in the barn kneeling beside a limping colt. She brought salve and a quiet presence. "You keep doing that," he said softly. "What coming back?" "I never knew I could." They didn't speak of love. Not yet. But there were other ways to name it, like leaving the porch light on, or letting someone rest their grief beside yours, or the way Rhett always made 2 cups of coffee now, even when she woke late. The town still whispered about her, called her wild, unfit, a charity case. But Mira had stopped listening. She'd started riding again, bareback fast, laughing into the wind, as if shedding layers of a name that never belonged to her. One morning she returned from the far ridge and found Rhett waiting with a new saddle in his hands. "No man gave me permission," she told him, wary. "I know he said, but maybe someone can still give you a gift." She didn't cry, not then. But later alone in the tack room, she touched the leather like it was an apology finally offered. And she whispered, "Thank you not to him, but to the girl she once was, who'd kept running until she found somewhere to stop." But what happens when the past catches up and tests everything she's just begun to believe? Autumn came with gold light and long shadows wrapping the land in a hush that felt almost sacred. Mira Halden now woke before the sun, not out of fear but habit. Her body, once coiled for flight, now moved with purpose. She baked bread on Sundays, learned how Rhett Lanigan liked his coffee, black, no sugar, just a splash of silence. They never named what they were. There were no vows, no kisses stolen in the night, but everything between them felt chosen, and slowly that was enough. One evening while stacking kindling, Mira turned to see 5 riders approaching. Dust curled around them like warning smoke. She knew one of the silhouettes before she could admit it to herself. Elias Trant, the man who once claimed her, the man who said she was too wild but still tried to cage her. "Thought I'd come for what's mine," he said, dismounting with a smirk that hadn't aged a day. "You were bought on paper, Mira. That makes you property." Rhett stepped forward, calm but unblinking. "She ain't paper. She's a person, and she's not yours," Elias sneered. "You gonna make it a fight, rancher?" Mira stepped between them. Her voice was low but steady. "I used to think I had to wait for someone to save me. Turns out I just had to stop letting men speak over me." She turned to Rhett, soft-eyed. "You never once tried to own me." He shook his head. "Just hoped you'd stay." The townsfolk gathered slowly, forming a circle around the riders. Someone whispered her name. Not the wild one, not the bought girl. Just Mira. And in that moment she saw it, how a reputation could be rewritten, not by shouting, but by showing up every single day with dignity intact. Elias left that evening humiliated. The town, once suspicious, began tipping their hats when she passed. Later that week, a child brought her a gift, a tiny carved mare, rough but earnest. "My pa says you ride like the wind," she smiled. "Sometimes wind's the only way I know how to pray." The ranch felt fuller now, not with things but with roots, things planted deep, things that wouldn't run. That night on the porch, Rhett handed her a small box. Inside was a silver ring, simple as a sunrise. "It's not a claim," he said. "It's just a place to rest your yes if you ever feel like giving it." Mira looked at the sky, wide open, endlessly forgiving. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel too wild. She felt wanted, without performance, without price, without fear. And sometimes the greatest freedom is finally being still. The snow came earlier than anyone liked, but Mira Halden didn't mind. There was peace in it, the hush of it falling on the barn roof, the way the world slowed like even time needed rest. And maybe that was all she'd ever wanted, not escape, but rest. Rhett Lanigan had started teaching her how to manage the books. He said it wasn't about trust. You already earned that, but about giving her what no one else had ever thought she needed: permanence. "You belong here, Mira," he said one morning, his voice rough with sleep. "Not because of what you do, just because you do." That kind of belonging, she found, didn't shout. It simply waited, like Rhett. Like the horses that now came when she whistled. Like the porch light he always left on, even when she stayed late brushing down the gelding. But the world outside didn't forget easily. The sheriff showed up one afternoon with a sealed envelope. "Legal matter," he said. "Seems a man's trying to undo a sale he made. Claims you were never rightfully freed." Mira felt her chest tighten, but not with fear. With fury. "I wasn't a slave," she said. "I was a girl with no choices." "Well," the sheriff said, scratching his chin, "looks like you've got one now. Go to court, or let it hang over you like a storm cloud." That night, Rhett stood beside her at the kitchen sink, his hand brushing hers as they dried plates. "You don't owe anyone anything," he said. She looked at him. "But I owe myself a life without shame." And so they went to town arm in arm. In front of the judge, Mira spoke with a calm, born of years held silent. "You cannot reverse what was done to me." But you won't undo what I've built since. I'm not here to be returned. I'm here to reclaim. The court ruled in her favor, not because it was kind, but because the law couldn't find a hook to hang her on anymore. And just like that, the tether was cut, not from a man, but from a memory. And when they rode back to the ranch, Mira didn't cry. She laughed, soft at first, then stronger. The wind carried it over the pasture, and even the horses paused to listen. The wild girl had ridden far, and now she had nowhere else to go. Because this was it, home. But what happens when a free woman learns to love, not because she must, but because she wants to? The pasture thawed before the creek did. Come spring, everything softened, the snow, the earth, even the air. But Mira Halden softened most of all. She still rose early, still carried oats to the horses before breakfast, still walked the fence line with boots muddied and braid wind-tangled. But something had changed in the way she moved through the world. She no longer flinched when her name was spoken, no longer glanced sideways before voicing an opinion. Her shoulders, once hunched with invisible weight, now rested square and steady, like they were finally done bracing. Rhett Lanigan, meanwhile, didn't press. He was a man who had learned the hard way that love, real love, didn't demand or perform. It simply stayed. He built her a bench near the pasture gate where she liked to sit at dusk. He carved her initials beside his on the barn beam where the swallows nested. He never said the words "not yet," but each gesture whispered them louder than any vow. One evening, as the sky blushed pink and the colts kicked playfully in the distance, Mira turned toward him. "I used to think I was born wrong," she said softly. "Too loud, too wild, too much." Rhett didn't interrupt. He only waited. "But now," she let the silence settle. "Now I think maybe I was just born waiting for the wrong place." He blinked slowly. "And is this the right one?" She looked around, at the field, the hills, the porch light he'd left on again just for her. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm not leaving to find out." And he nodded. That night she took his hand at dinner, not because she needed him to pull her anywhere, but because she had chosen to stand beside him, finally not as a burden, not as a redemption, but as a woman who had found her rhythm. The town that once called her unfit, unworthy, untamable, had gone quiet. And on that ranch with a man who saw her without fear, Mira Halden no longer had to outrun her past. She had simply outgrown it. Sometimes the wild aren't meant to be tamed, just given enough space to run free beside someone who'll match their stride. Would you stay to watch how love unfolds in silence and strength? Some folks say love is something you fall into, but Rhett and Mira taught us something different, that real love isn't falling. It's choosing again and again. It's making room for someone's silence. It's standing beside the fire in them, not trying to put it out. She was called too wild. He was told he'd never recover. But out there beneath open skies and quiet mornings, they met not as fixer and broken, but as two souls done being misunderstood. And maybe that's the lesson we can carry into our own lives, that no one is ever too much when they're with the right person. That the things we were once shamed for, our fire, our voice, our stubborn grace, might just be the very thing someone's been praying to find. So if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unloved, I hope this story reminded you it's never too late to be chosen for who you are, exactly as you are. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga, where we tell gentle, powerful stories just like this one. And if you're still here, thank you. Would you want to see what happens after Mira stays? Or hear more stories about women like her? Let us know in the comments. Your voice is welcome here.